And I want to thank the most venerable Jin Wu and also the abbot of the temple and the monks and the nuns who are supporting this very important event for all of Korea. And honestly, my heart has been heavy as I have turned my attention to what is happening in the world today. The genocide in Palestine and Gaza, the bombing of Lebanon, the genocide in Sudan, the great challenges in Myanmar. And of course, we cannot turn our attention away from what is happening in Ukraine as we're in this room right now. We are in what is called a polycrisis, a crisis of many different reflections: environmental, economic, political, and of course the violence of war, racism, and sexism. What is hanging over Korea, South Korea, this very day? Not only North Korea, but also China. So you might have gathered I'm a socially engaged Buddhist. I have been doing meditation practice since the mid-1960s, but because of my first encounter with Buddhism through the Venerable Thich Nhat Hanh, my own work as a social activist combined with the experience that arose for me in the context of contemplative practice, including working with dying people in the prison system and with homeless people, the unsheltered. And in preparation for this talk today, my mind also turned to what happened in China 1,200 years ago. It happened in the kind of climax of the Tang Dynasty. It was when the mercenaries turned against the emperor and then fomented a rebellion, the rebellion called An Lushan. And in the 8 years of that ghastly violence, 2 out of 3 people in China perished from famine and from war. At this time, there was a very great poet who was trapped in Chang'an at this time. And he wrote a very raw 2-line poem. The poem was called "The View This Spring." And the 2 lines are, "The nation is destroyed, mountains and rivers remain." I have worked with dying people for many decades. And you are Buddhist practitioners. You understand from your direct experience what it is to live in the truth of uncertainty and the truth of impermanence. The nation is destroyed. We die. All things will perish on this earth. Even our sun will perish one day. But also there is birth, there is a rising. And even as there's birth and death, the second line in the poem goes, "Mountains and rivers remain." There is that which is changeless, that which is eternal, that which has ceased altogether. And it is precisely the realization of these 2 aspects, the aspect of change and the aspect of cessation, that I want to address today. I want to address it in relation to the encounter with suffering. And for the purpose of our gathering, the suffering that dying people experience, the suffering of being subject to intractable pain, pain that cannot be controlled, the suffering of the deformation of the body in the dying process, the suffering of the loss of identity, the suffering of the grip of fear, and the question, what is it to offer presence in the midst of extreme suffering? And what is it that the encounter with dying and death give us as practitioners, as human beings? My third Zen teacher was someone who had a very deep relationship with people who had no homes, with the unsheltered. He also was Jewish, and he brought us to the concentration camp of Auschwitz, where we would sit on the selection site, the place where Jews were brought during the Second World War. And the Nazis would say, "You will be put to death. You may survive." And Glassman Roshi gave a powerful teaching, which he called the 3 tenets, or the 3 guidelines. And as someone who had worked with dying people for many, many years, and also worked in the prison system on death row and maximum security, these 3 guidelines were very powerful for me to work with. How could I use this guideline to actually come alongside a dying person or a man on death row? And the first guideline was, sit with not knowing. It reminded me of the teaching of my first Zen teacher, Sungsang Sansanim, who said, only keep, don't know mind. What is it to be able to sit with a dying person and not have your fear arise, and also expectations about how you would like for this person's experience to be? So in this work with dying people, being able to open to whatever is arising without bias, in a completely unmediated way, this is sitting with not knowing. You know, being radically open to things just as they are. And the second guideline is bearing witness. What is it to connect completely, not turn away from, but to come alongside exactly what is happening in this present moment? And the third tenet or guideline is compassionate action, which arises from not knowing and bearing witness. Responding to the truth of suffering in a non-prescriptive, unmediated way. And I came to understand that the 3 tenets characterized the heart, the attitude, and the behavior of the bodhisattvas. In Zen we say, bodhisattvas do not seek easy situations. And the plant associated with bodhisattvas is the lotus. And symbolically, the root of the lotus goes deep into the mud of suffering. And as a caregiver of someone who is dying, or sitting in Auschwitz, or feeding the unsheltered, you are coming alongside, not separating from the truth of suffering that is in that particular situation. You're in the mud. So please understand, my friends, this view is the foundation that is about the courage to not deny the truth of suffering, but to connect deeply with it, to come alongside it, and to actually allow it to transform how we are in the world. And this is why I feel we have to have a strong practice that allows us to uphold ourselves in the midst of suffering. I think many of you are aware that I have been working with dying people for over 50 years. And I have become so aware not only of the suffering that dying people go through, but also the challenges that are experienced by those who serve the dying or serve the homeless or serve those who have fled their country. And I'm so grateful that a book about these challenges that I wrote some years ago is translated into Korean. And in the book I describe, for example, how important altruism is in our experience as human beings, but also as communities. You know, what it is to offer ourselves selflessly, unselfishly, to allay or alleviate the suffering of others. But I also describe how harming yourself can actually happen in acts of altruism, or even in the endeavor to serve someone else. You can actually harm them by your actions. And there's a term for this. It's pathological altruism. Another area that I explore has to do with empathy, our capacity to be in resonance, to sense into the experience of another. But the over-identification with someone who is suffering can actually harm ourselves. And this is called empathic distress. Another area that is very problematic for people who are working in the field of suffering is integrity. What it means to serve out of our deepest values related to respect, to dignity, and compassion. And when those values are violated by us or the institutions in which we serve, we experience moral suffering. Also, respect is so important. But what we often see in our world today is people treating each other disrespectfully. In my country, for example, almost 15% of nurses have left the profession of nursing because they have been bullied by their peers. And the last, what I call edge state, is that of engagement. That is serving those who are suffering in a way where there is respect, where there is integrity, where the environment that you're working in is a healthy environment. The institution that you're working in is a healthy, caring environment. But when you work in an institution where there is disrespect, where your work feels meaningless, or you're overworking, you can easily experience burnout. And one of the most extraordinary things that we have discovered in the field of neuroscience and social psychology and in studying group processes is that the way to transform out of toxic states into healthy states is through compassion. Compassion includes this capacity to attend deeply to another. And this is where you see the power and the value of a contemplative practice. That is, meditation itself is about cultivating what is called in social psychology attentional balance. That capacity is characterized by clarity of resolution and the ability to actually keep your attention on an individual or an object or the breath for a sustained period of time. But without attentional balance, you're not able to see things clearly. The second piece of compassion has to do with our capacity to feel genuine concern for the well-being of others. I mean, what is your motivation for giving care to the dying, or feeding the homeless, or giving shelter to an unhoused person? Why are you doing this? The cultivation of an unselfish, loving attitude which is dedicated to the benefit of others is essential for not only the well-being of others, but truly of our own well-being. Another aspect of compassion is having the capacity to look deeply into the roots of suffering, to discern and to investigate, to inquire what is going on here and what will truly serve to benefit the person who is suffering. And the fourth aspect of compassion is this commitment to act to benefit others. And as some of you know, I developed a tool that is used in many parts of Japan by clinicians and in my country and in Europe that allows us to cultivate compassion while we are interacting with others. I need to say this from my heart as we are facing so many problems in our world today. As we know from the Buddhist perspective, wisdom and compassion are. They are interconnected. And dedicating our lives to actualizing wisdom and compassion to the benefit of others is what is called renewing humanity. We know, for example, in my country, young people who are engaged in activities that benefit others have many fewer psychological problems, have much lower rate of suicide. Just like in my Zen center in Santa Fe, young people cook for the homeless. They sit with dying people. They rewild areas that have been devastated. They plant pollinator meadows for the bees. They do not deny the truth of suffering, but they renew their humanity by engaging in acts of compassion. The future of Buddhism rests with young people. What we are endeavoring to do in the few days that we are here in Korea is to bring a kind of renewing of Buddhism and renewing of humanity by understanding the profound value of a contemplative practice. A wonderful Zen teacher, now dead for a number of years, but Uchiyama Roshi has written, he said, the life of a Zen practitioner is directed by vow, not by ambition. The life of a Zen practitioner is directed by vow, not by ambition. When he wrote, he says, when you meet the life that is forever, that is the miracle. Going back to the poem, the nation is destroyed, mountains and rivers remain. Another way that we say the life that is forever is this way. The enlightened person, and these are the words of Roshi Norman Fisher, the enlightened person is simply the person who is not selfish, who sees things as they really are, loves them and acts out of that love. I began this talk calling to mind what is happening in many parts of the world in relation to war, but also what is close to my life, the encounter with dying and death. Truly, every moment gives us the possibility for waking up and also for benefiting others. You know, I said early on in this talk, bodhisattvas do not seek easy situations. I'm remembering the teachings of 8th century Tang dynasty Zen master Ma. He taught that responding to what's actually happening in this very moment, right now, it's an essential part of our life, of our awakening, of our whole experience. And then he said something like, burying oneself in emptiness is to suffer the torments of hell. As our hearts and minds open in the experience of meditation, as we open our hand to the world through the experience of meditation, hell comes to an end. Zen Master Ma realized that hell wasn't what was happening around him. Hell was actually turning away from suffering and trying to escape into your own personal peace. And then Ma said, and this was very hard times in China, he said to his disciples, benefit what cannot be benefited. Do what cannot be done. So I say to you, may we together as a community benefit all those who need our care and do what cannot be done. So I want to finish this talk with a few lines from Shantideva. And those lines are, for as long as space remains, and as long as beings remain, may I too remain to end the sorrows in this world. So thank you for your kind attention.